Downshift TV 314. This is your brother, Bianchi Katai Muntu Nefer Amon Ra. And today we got another powerful show for you. But before we get into it, let me do my usual spiel. Let me say hotep to my fellow Kemetic brothers and sisters. Let me say God bless to all my Christian brothers and sisters. Let me say Islam to my Moorish brothers and sisters. Let me say Assalamu alaikum to my brothers and sisters in the NOI. Let me say Shalom to my Hebrew Israelite brothers and sisters. And let me say peace to my brothers and sisters in the nation of gods and earths. And for those who remain, let me say Jambo for the rest of y'all in the African diaspora, whether you're here in the wilderness of the United States of America or beyond. As y'all know, I say that greeting for one reason and one reason only. If you're Black, I'm with you and I hope that you're with me. Our different ideologies shouldn't keep us from uniting. We can disagree without being disrespectfully disagreeable, and we can have unity without uniformity. And with that, my brother, B. Wash, welcome back to the program. Let's get into it.
Man, what's going on, good people? It's your boy, brother Byron Washington here, representing on this good, cool afternoon with our brother Bianchi, man. So yeah, let's get into it. This is gonna be an interesting discussion. This is really just meeting, just us talking, kind of like that barbershop afternoon talk. We're not here, trying to. It's not really a debate. I don't really see how this topic could be. What we talk about. I don't really see how it's a debate. It's either what happened and didn't happen, and then how we understand it today, in today's terms, and how do we reconcile certain things. So I think it's a good topic for anybody who is in my opinion, pro-Black, African. If you authentically interested in Christianity, whether it be a faith or just from a spiritual tradition. I think this is important for everybody to take some of the nuggets that we talk about to dive in for yourself, because none of us here are experts. So I want to say that first. I ain't expert. I'm leaning on expertise of experts.
Yeah, and I just want to say this from the gate. This is not a situation where me and my brother are here to hash out disagreements or anything like that. This is just our brother telling us what he knows about a particular subject matter, and me just asking questions. So it's not a debate. It's not a point of contention. This is actually him teaching from a position of knowledge, and me and a lot of y'all in the audience listening from a position of ignorance. And for those who know about it, just being updated on it or seeing somebody else who know about it. So this will not be a debate whatsoever. This just happened to be a subject that I have a lot of interest in. So, and I hope that it educates or edutains, as I always say, a lot of the listening audience. With that being said, though, bro, let's put something on the table real quick that I think is important as we get into this conversation. Two things. The common motif throughout our community and for a long time has been that Christianity is the white man's religion. And there is a conflation with Christianity and white supremacy. Break down your stance on those two things, number one, and then we'll get into the meat, so to speak, of what we're here to do.
And there's so many avenues to really attack the notion of white man's religion and white supremacy. But I guess the best way to look at it is, with anything, you got to take into effect the history and where it spread to from its beginning, and then what changed in certain people groups. So I went from Christianity, I look at it from like a historical perspective. We know that it spread to as far east as China, to Russia, to India, to of course the mother continent, Africa, Europe, and in the first 5-6 centuries, we know that. But we here in America in particular are, our children, our grandchildren of a particular expression of alleged Christianity and its marriage to secular ideologies like um, doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny, stuff like that, white supremacy for the most part. So I always look at it as, all right, let me see what's the outlier. Does the outlier represent what the faith tradition is talking about? And for most people that I know of, especially who know Christianity, know New Testament Christianity in some way, form, or fashion, they will at least acknowledge to say, they don't really have a problem with the Messiah and his teachings. They have a problem really with the expression of what has happened here, that tool. And so I tell people all the time, it's like a hammer, man. Like a hammer is meant to build homes. And if you hear some in the background, I got a 1-year-old, 3-year-old, y'all. So I'm unapologetically a proud father. So I ain't gonna uh
Right.
I ain't gonna never apologize for being a daddy.
Nor should you. And if people don't understand that, they in the wrong place.
So for me, like I said, the hammer thing, man, a hammer can build a house, but it also can tear down the house, but it also can be used for violence. People have been bludgeoned to death by hammers, and on both sides of it, stuff like that. Is that the intention of the hammer? No. Is that the intention of the person who made the hammer? No. Is that the use of 90% of the people who have hammers in their house, what they do with it? No, they don't. I don't go to Lowe's and Home Depot to get a hammer with the intention of one day using it to go and bash my neighbor upside the head, you know? And so that's my take when it comes to Christianity and white supremacy. I think and I say that, real shortly, because there's, at this point in time, and this was 5 years ago, we can do a whole show on it, right? But I think there's plenty enough material from both Christians and even non-Christians at this point to at least to show that Christianity as a faith is not married to white supremacy. It has nothing to do with it. White supremacy in its own thing is almost its own ideology and religion in and of itself, when you really think about it. And that's kind of always that's been my take. But I understand also that from an indigenous people and African people, the way our faith traditions are made real is by how we express them. And so if you're an indigenous American or you're an African and you see somebody professing Jesus, but their actions are heinous, ungodly, et cetera, in your worldview, then that means that faith tradition produces that expression. But not understanding in those specific Europeans' worldview, they can separate spiritual expression and separate, secular church and state, essentially. They can go to church service on a Sunday and then, go to a hanging that afternoon and see no problem with it. I've been pray to God and then go out and see how many Native American skulls you can crack open and take the skin from. That's they can separate that. We don't come from a culture um, that can do that. So I understand why we had that response of looking at Christianity and saying like, man, this is white supremacy, because it's like almost two worldviews clashing, and we have to go and look at to see, what's the authentic truth while who representing what. And to our credit, we got a bunch of African and indigenous peoples that have been calling out the fake Christianity in the Americas long before you and I were even thought of. Our ancestors who fought for our freedoms on this land, they were calling this out long, long, long ago. And so yeah, man, that's kind of my little pre topic diatribe, I should say.
Well said, bro. Well said. And I wanted to get that out the way off the bat before we even got into the subject matter. So I think you covered it tremendously. So let's get into the meat of why we're here, and let's talk about the Coptic Church and the Nubian Church from an ancient standpoint of the Nile Valley and its impact on Christianity then and now. And just start with from the beginning, and I'll interject, where necessary for me to get an understanding. But other than that, I'm gonna let you rock.
Right. So I'm gonna start with acknowledging uh what we would call kind of the four, maybe five, but I say four ancient continental African. And I use that term continental African because Africa, as we know it, it uses the term is anachronistic. Those people that they didn't have a concept of continental Africa the way we do, and so you could be, and I'm using the side of, you can be as African as we see it today, and have been born in like Rome, or been born in Antioch or Arabia or Turkey. We was everywhere. So our 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 heritage doesn't isn't limited just continental Africa. But for the sake of this discussion, I'm gonna use the terms on continental Africa. You have the Coptic Church, which is Egyptian. For those who don't know, Coptic and Egyptian are literally the same terms. It's just the Greek rendition of it versus the Latin rendition of it. Um, you also have the North African Church, uh, which is basically like a Berber church. And I say North Africa. At the time, they would call it Africa because anywhere basically to the west of Egypt proper would it be, they would in North Africa they would call it Africa because again they didn't have a term for the continent, so actually it's Africa Proconsulares and a couple other names as well too, but all we just call it today North Africa, so we know that we're not talking about the continent versus the people.
And real quick, bro, for the people who have slow gases and who gonna try to get upset with my brother, he's using colloquial terms that people are used to
Mm-hmm.
when he's talking about these places. So I don't want to hear or see in the comments, why didn't he say Kemet? We know and understand the difference between Kemet and Egypt
Right.
from a cultural sense. But he's talking about just from a geographic sense and from an understanding that people outside of our community may not know. I just want to get that straight before we even start hearing that.
I
Go ahead,
appreciate I appreciate that, man, because to be clear, I'm using terms that general academia, learn. If you Google, you're not gonna find a lot of scholars using the term Kemetic. They should, but they don't. And same way for Africa, and same way for really, and those are the other two churches. But the other churches that I'm gonna name, Nubia, the Nubian church, and the Ethiopian church, and even Ethiopia is I won't say a misnomer, but at the time they would have referred to themselves as Abyssinian more than Ethiopian, because Ethiopian that country adopts that name nomenclature. I want to say in the 1800s. I could be wrong, but sometime later. At the time, they would have been referring themselves as the Abyssinian Empire, or some other iteration. But again, using these terms so people can have a geographical understanding. And so the two churches that still exist today, that would be the Coptic Church and the Ethiopian Church. And I want to say off the Ethiopian Church, you also got the Eritrean Church, which is I think about a decade or so old, coming off the Ethiopian Church. The two churches that are in their proper sense and no longer in existence would be the North African Church uh, and the Nubian Church. And so those churches are the ones for me that I want to know more about, because I kind of know why both of them don't exist anymore. But there's still a lot of history within both of those churches that have been kind of engulfed in other traditions. And so a lot of times we don't even know the Africanness, and I'm using that term loosely, but the Africanness, the blackness, whatever term you want to call it, of expressions of Christianity and theology, because it's been just kind of engulfed into some broader, a lot of times more European expressions. So, that's something for us as we continue to talk, we'll dive into and kind of see that dichotomy of what happened. But yeah, starting with that, you got those four what we call ancient African churches. And then from there, you get, surprisingly, to and again, I don't want to shock, I hope this don't shock people. You get infiltration into forms in West and Central Africa. Again, not a majority. Not saying that everybody in West Central Africa is Christian, not by a long shot. But what we're saying is that because of those other ancient churches, that you get a natural flow, missionary flow, whatever you want to call it, into sections in West and Central Africa, which shouldn't be a surprise for anybody here, because we know Africans throughout history have always traded, been intersectional with each other. And so it is not, we shouldn't be shocked. Actually, we should be more offended that we didn't already assume that they had some type of Christianity in West and Central Africa before a European ever stepped foot there. Because if we know they were already trading and ideas and people moving to and fro, all of a sudden, like when it comes to this faith thing, it's like, oh, I ain't never heard of that. But we have no problem accepting that Islam made it to West and Central Africa through other Africans and Arabs. But apparently we when West Africa is just some imaginary border that Christianity could never find its way to touch in forms of fashion. So that's kind of where I'm at with it right now, at least establishing those ground rules so we know the areas that we talk about and the ancient expressions that we talk about.
There it is. And so from that standpoint, so a lot of a lot of talk or a lot of discussion is around, from our community anyway, is around this the idea or the notion, theory, however you want to put it, that even from an ancient standpoint, Christianity was spread to the continent violently. In other words, our Coptic or Kemetic ancestors who became Christians did so without choice. It was either that or be persecuted unto death, torture, etc. And the same thing extended down the Nile into Nubia and Kush in those areas. What's the real story, um, based on the research that you've done and the knowledge you've been able to attain with regards to when Christianity first started? I'm not talking about under the Roman Empire and beyond, but when it first started and went into the continent, those African ancestors of ours who converted over, was it through persecution or was it through their own volition? As far as what you discovered.
So it would be, and further, I want to say shout out to our brother Nobody. I see he just logged in. So Nobody, I just want to give him the floor, give you an intro, good brother.
Peace, good bro.
How y'all doing, man? Y'all doing all right?
We doing
good. We good, man. We good. Getting a history lesson from our residential African Christianity scholar on Paradigm Shift TV.
Yeah. Sure. I heard Byron was supposed to come on today and gone and give his spiel, man. Yeah, I'm tuning in, man. Byron, to show you some support. I might not say too much, but I'm here in support of you, bro.
Appreciate you, bro.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. So PT, your original thing, man. The answer would be no. That it did not spread to our Kemetic ancestors, because it spread to Kemet first and foremost. So I want to put that clear. When Christianity spread into Africa, it spread into Kemet first. That's where you get not only what we would call the Septuagint or the Old Testament, but that's where you get most of your New Testament writings are written, especially the Gospels are written in or copied in ancient Kemet. So that is where it begins to spread throughout Africa through the Apostle Mark. But in its beginning, remember, Christianity is a looked at as a Jewish sect. So Judaism, it's the Roman Empire, right? Then some knocks down, you get the Judaism, and then it's not even like the primary Jewish sect where you got the Sadducees and Pharisees and stuff like that. It's looked at this like this kind of like a little offshoot deal. So really and truly, people aren't even worried about Christianity at that point in time. They're kind of looking like, man, they do talk about this brown guy that we killed that they allegedly saw come back, blah blah blah. But as we see it spreading in ancient Kemet, and as they spread to other parts of Africa, what you see is that they're interacting with the gospel and their native spiritualities. And so I won't say like there's never any violence, because there's always violence wherever you are. I don't care who you are. I'm not being fantastical, but in spreading of that faith, violence was not a key factor, because they were almost like a non-issue with these people. And then two, the Roman Empire, for at least the first 300 years, persecuted Christians. And so you actually had more Black and brown Christians being persecuted in these coliseums, being fed to wolves, lions, bears, and stuff like that. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Coptic Church and some of the writings of the North African Church, they also looked at the Church of the Martyrs, because one of the sayings is that you can put all the martyrs from Coptic, Egypt, and North Africa and put them on the scale and put it across all martyrs across the world, and it wouldn't come close, meaning that they were killing so many Africans for just professing being Christian. It was ridiculous. It was bloody for just professing that faith. And so when we talk about that spread, no, man, during that point in time, that spread was just purely spiritual, intellectual, whatever you want to call it, but it was not something to where you had to get down or lay down. In fact, it was quite the opposite. It is actually easier for somebody to say they were not Christian and live than to just say they were Christian, which was almost a death sentence for a lot of times. So,
talk about a little bit about something that you and I have talked about a lot, and that's the commonalities that our African ancestors in Kemet and beyond saw between the African spiritual concepts that were indigenous to where they were from, and Christianity, and why those commonalities helped with their conversion, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. I would go, one is you got to look at I always start with that whole region from the Sahel to the Nile Valley to Mesopotamia to Arabia to the Levant. All these people knew each other. They knew they came from similar cultures, languages were similar, trading with each other, they interacted. So there was never this kind of like shock, who are these people? Two, as kind of you and I talked about before, at least with Christianity in the Old Testament or the Israelite religion, outside of really the Exodus narrative, you don't really see a major tension between the Israelites and people we term as Africans today, pre-Exodus narrative and post-Exodus narrative. You don't see this big, like, a lot of people in the community try to put this Israelite versus Kemet in. Like, it wasn't really like that. They didn't really have beef. Like, in fact, they were more favorable with with ancient Kemet and Ethiopia and Nubia, with relations even for aid, and so I want to get that out there first. Like there was already they didn't have this war intention. But then as we get to the Christian understanding, is a lot of the same concepts that Christianity teaches and expresses. Um, Ancient Africans, Kemetic, and beyond already had kind of a foundational understanding of the principles. So, principles as resurrection, principles as a supernatural world of good and evil, a supreme being, creator being, having subordinate beings under that creator being. The human being trying to get back to its original divine nature. These type of things, were not new. The idea of a God King, Christ being that God King, but having just that idea, that foundational of a priestly godly king that's a prophet. These things were not new in and of themselves. And so when they get the scriptures, for a lot of times, you get them seeing like a full realization of their already native spiritual traditions. They kind of see like, oh, this is what these shadow of things are alluding to. They're trying to point us to. But still keeping, again, their native African cultures, traditions, languages, but just understanding what the gospel, when it's presented to them, they didn't have to um, understand new concepts as in a way that when Christianity reached other cultures, I say that they had to relearn what do you mean resurrection? What do you mean the dead are not actually, they're dead, but there's an afterlife. The things that you do, you will be judged for in the afterlife. What you do today, stuff like that. Other cultures, they had to learn that from a base ground level. Africans, as you know, especially in the Kemetic world, that was not something that they had to learn, um, had to understand, anything like that. They were like, we already at we already at 8. While everybody else at level 1, level 2. We already masters, and you get that because your earliest theologians, Christian theologians, most of them are African or what we call Afro-Asiatic. Again, not all, but most of them, because they like, we already understand these concepts. We grew up with these worldviews and concepts, and understanding what things meant. The marriage of the natural and the supernatural, all this type of stuff, man. So that's why for them, you see such a smooth transition, especially in our African cultures, when they decide to go into the Christian faith. It's just like, hey, this stuff we already know, and it just really illuminating more what we already understand.
Got you. And to me, it seemed like, thank you, son. It seemed like people have a hard time accepting that, kind of on both ends of the spectrum, but particularly on the African spiritual side, or the pro-black side, that Black Africans, actually converted to Christianity willingly at that earlier stage in history. And it's like, if they did it by choice, you could be upset with them for doing it, but let's not make up uh scenarios as to why they did it. If they did it willingly, respect their choice. Like,
Right.
just put some respect on their choice. For whatever reason. If you want to say, like, you think they was manipulated, whatever the case may be, they made a decision to go this route after having grown up with this particular uh belief. So let's talk about a particular symbol or word in the Kemetic language that I think is probably one of the most misunderstood because of co-opting because I always say Christianity was co-opted by Europeans and weaponized against indigenous people across the planet, particularly Africans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this symbol suffered the same fate. The Ankh. And we know that in the Kemetic language, the Ankh is a symbol for life and it's the word for life. I've heard Christians question this. I've heard other people say that it's an inversion of the cross. But if I'm not mistaken, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the Coptic Church used the Ankh as they continue to use it as a spiritual or religious symbol. Talk about their use of it, as it symbolizes that it isn't something that's occultish or to be viewed as evil, even from a Christian lens, so to speak. Because we know that certain, Aleister Crowley and all of these different individuals have taken on the symbol. You know, you see people of European descent that call themselves Goth or whatever. They'll have a tattoo of the arm, not even really understanding what it means from an African standpoint. But speak to how the Coptic Church viewed the arm and how they used it with regards to from a symbolic standpoint.
Right. I'm a first because I forgot to put this point out there, because you mentioned something about people giving excuses away of why Africans would have converted, because I've seen stuff to where like, oh well, they were living in this Hellenistic, Platonic, and blah 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 blah. And I always tell people, man, look, like read what those brothers and sisters wrote, rather than superimposing that, giving reasons why they did and why they didn't. Read what they wrote, and they tell you why they did so. Because in the same way that you and I are of African descent, but we don't think as Europeans, right? We may use the language, we speak in English, but we don't think as Europeans. In the same way, let's not discredit our ancestors who may have been brought up in a Greco-Roman society, may have spoken the language, but to accuse them of now, they're now theologically Hellenistic or Platonic or stuff, is like, that's, to me, I want to just put that out there for the viewing audience. Let's not do that, because we don't want to disrespect to assume on one end the greatness of these people, the minds, the things that they came up with. But all of a sudden, when they got to Greco-Roman rule, they became blind, deaf, and dumb and couldn't think for themselves. But then we don't hold that same measure for ourselves to say, my last name Washington, I for damn sure don't have the same theological and worldview as George Washington. And I speak English. I live in America. I'm an American citizen. I participating in this democratic capitalist society, but that still don't mean I have the same worldview, thoughts, and mindsets of Europeans. Let's not do that to our people who weren't even removed from the land. Like, we were removed from our land. Those people weren't even removed from their land. So even with them being taken over, go ahead. Yeah, my bad, nobody.
The Bible says that you are who your father is. So if George Washington your daddy, bro, you got to be just like him, bro. I'm just messing with you. Go ahead, bro.
Hey man, get your ass off of here, man. You are no longer welcome.
My bad, bro. I ain't mean to stop your flow.
No, you good, man. They good. I just want to put that out because I know that's a big ejection a lot of times. It's like, oh, these were Grecanized Africans or Romanized Africans, and I'm like, man, that's interesting how we all speak in English and on these social media platforms that weren't created by African people, but we can have cognitive dissonance with that. But apparently, 2,000 years ago, our African ancestors just were blind, deaf, and dumb. They couldn't understand the differences.
That's a powerful point, bro. That's a powerful.
Right, and that's just logic, bro. Like, I mean, honestly, I'm glad that you broke it down like that, but it's a shame in 2021 that you have to break it down like that when that should be common sense. That should be logic. Like you said, we know people that move to other countries all the time, just within our lifetime, and they are still who they are. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, man, I agree with you
Here's
on
the
that
thing, bro.
100%. And anybody who disagree,
Well, what you gotta
go ahead, big bro.
understand though, bro, is for the people who disagree. You get some people, like I say, you got some people that just got slow gas, but then you got other people who have ingrained biases based on experiences, based on um, just a level of disdain for Christianity, regardless of what you say, and they just haven't looked into this information close enough. They've heard someone who they love and respect say, no, it was at the end of a sword. That's it. They ain't got to do no research for themselves. They ain't got to go try to educate themselves and get no knowledge. Such and such said it. That's it. Jabari Osazi said it. Baba Haru said it. Ashtra Kwesi said it. And respect to all of them. I love them personally. But if they said it, that's what it is. I ain't got to look at nothing. What I got to go look at it for? And so my point being, but that's my point. That's not to say that they is necessarily doing something wrong. It's just that they've been quote unquote church hurt, or they weren't raised in the church, whatever the case, whatever their personal scenario is with why they no longer a Christian or never was. And then again, somebody whose information they trust, somebody they admire, somebody they love, told them this is what it was. That person may be telling them because they really believe it. And that's the information they got. It's many layers to it. This is a nuanced situation as to why people not aware of it. It's not just they dumb. This is just not that's not how it works.
And
I agree with you on that. Yeah, of course.
I just wanted to put that out there just because I know that's before I got in about the Coptic stuff like and everything. Hold on one second, yeah.
Yeah, if you'd have talked to me 4 years ago, I'd have been nah, bro. Straight like that. It's they conquered, and that's what it was. It wouldn't like I'd be ready to fight y'all talking about some Africans willingly converted to Christianity. You know what I'm saying? Not because mind you, I'm not saying that all Africans did. Right. I'm just saying that this particular lesson, right?
And with this, I always say this: when our greatest heroes, right? Malcolm, Martin, Harriet, Frederick. Last I checked, all of them, none of those names are African.
Exactly.
Last time I checked, all of them spoke, quote unquote, the King's English. Last time I checked, all of them were, at least for Malcolm and Martin, at least American citizens, and Douglas and Harriet fighting for that stuff. Nobody would accuse them of having the same ideology as their white owners, overseers, suppressors, blase. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't say Martin Luther King has the same ideology as George Wallace, right? But it's so we can see that we have enough sense. So I would just, like I say, I just tell people, gain the same respect you do to our more recent ancestors. Do the same respect to the ancient ancestors, and not assuming that they just was blind, deaf, and dumb. But to your original question, so look at three things from three different cultures, and it's crazy. The first one, biblical text, I'm gonna use the term logos, right? That's a Platonic word. That is not biblical. That is not Hebraic. That is Platonic. That is Greco-Roman. But St. John uses that term to express a thought and understanding. And so, to my Black brothers and sisters in the faith, if you're gonna get upset about an unk, you better be upset about using the term logos or the word, because again, that comes from a non-Christian understanding to express a thought that is true. So another example, you look at ancient Chinese culture, Christianity, I want to say in the 600s, 700s, they have the cross coming out the lotus flower. And anybody who's familiar with, even baseline ancient Chinese symbolism, the lotus flower is like, almost like equivalent to the Kemetic Ankh. That's something that they take serious, which is a form of rebirth, life giving, stuff like that. And so they have the cross coming out there. They're expressing a thought, a symbolism to say, the rebirth is coming out of the lotus flower. I mean, giving you their idea of it. And again, and then shout out to the ancient Chinese Christianity, because they didn't say Christianity, they call it the way, or Jingzhao, in their language. And then you go into the Kemetic thought, and as you say with the Ankh, when they converted, they looked at these symbols and said, man, like Ankh means life, life giving, sometimes rebirth. We trying to express this stuff. It looks similar to the cross, because contrary to what we all know, we don't, that exact T looking figure, it didn't look exactly like that. It's looking at broken wood, so it could have been off angle or whatever. But they see that in their culture, and they're like, we're gonna use this to express a thought. And again, we're talking about a tradition that at this point is 2,000 years old. And so it's almost like, for no disrespect to our black brothers and sisters in the faith, but for you to question them on how their culture took the faith, and they've been doing something for 2,000 years, and you superimposing that based off of some uh European Gothic Aleister Crowley type of stuff that comes centuries and centuries later, and a misrepresentation, to our brothers and sisters in faith, we gotta do better. We gotta give those people their credit, and they understand that what for them the pre-Christian, post-Christian, it still represents what it represents. It's always meant life, right? But now it's, when they say life, what do they mean? Well, they're talking about through the Messiah, the Hamashiach. So, and that's what they're expressing within their culture. And so for us to sit here and criticize them, as believers, and I had discussion with believers too. I'm like, hey man, you gotta take a couple steps back real quick before you start criticizing African Christianity when it comes to that stuff, especially a tradition that's 2,000 something years old. Like, you gotta fall back a little bit on that kind of stuff. And then also from our Kemetic brothers and sisters, well, like you said, Brother P, is showing them, hey, these people freely accepted the faith, and they took what was native and cultural to them to express it. So they didn't need a Roman or a English or a Russian or a Arabic or Turkish understanding. They took what was native to them to convey a truth that they had always been a part of. And so, on both sides, like you say, we have to become better at knowing what people are saying and meaning when they do certain stuff, and understanding our collective history, because it's still our collective history. Whether you agree with the faith or not, it's still historical facts that these things happen. And so we need to know what happened and why.
And for those of you who wonder why I always say when I had a brother on the program, I'm just gonna say it again. This is why I fuck with Byron Washington. Period. But I'm gonna go. I'm gonna move on. Let's talk about how uh, Christianity, because it's for let's let before we move on. Let's talk about the development of the church in Kemet and the formation of the Coptic Church, and then I want you to kind of segue as it moved down the Hapi or the Nile
Yeah.
into Nubia, and the formation of that church. And then we'll talk about the impact it had on the faith, as it were, overall, as it spread throughout the continent and further up into Europe. But the impact and the elements of those two churches that had on the overall church, if you will.
So I would say I will always start when you talk about African Christianity. You got to start with ancient Kemet because, like I said, that's where it first began. And then your second one uh, station would be what would they call Carthage or North African Christianity. The impact, and hold on to your horses. Some people may not like it. Some people are gonna like it, but it is what it is. The impact is a lot of the expressions that we attribute to European expressions are actually African in nature. So expressions like we talk about Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, High Church Anglicanism, stuff like that. You look at some of the wear, the vestments, the palums that they have. A lot of that stuff is actually you can find all throughout North Africa or Northeast or Northwest Africa, pre-Christian. The Kemetic priests, the Berber priests, the Libyan priests, all these different priestly classes, they were always rocking this stuff as a means to understand the spiritual nature. So, of course, when Coptic Egypt or Coptic Coptic Kemet gets a hold of Christianity, well, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to use your native traditions to express it. And so things that we assume, we make fun of like the Pope hat and and stuff like that. Not understanding, bro, you can actually go on the walls of Kemet right now and find the exact same hat. And in fact, what happens is a lot of times this is where the thin line goes, like our brother Jabari, when people have the accusation like, oh, Christianity is a copycat of Kemetic religion. And it's not a copycat in that the people of that day only did what they were native to know to do. But because it spread to Europe, to Asia, and other places, they took those same expressions and used it within European churches. If you go to Rome right now, there's in the Basilica, there's a long statuary pyramid type figure. I can't think of the name. I was about to say it, I couldn't think of it. It's very similar to our was it not Lincoln Memorial, George Washington Memorial that we have here.
Yeah, it's they call it but we called it a Tekken.
There we go.
And so, and it for us, it was a symbol of resurrection because Aset fashioned this Tekken so that her and Asor could conceive the ultimate savior of Kemet in Heru. And yeah, they like if you go to any cemetery right now,
they're gonna have one in there.
It's people who are Christians that have a Tekken as their headstone. And knowingly or unknowingly, Kemetic culture permeates throughout Western civilization. That's why I would surmise that Norma is the true father of Western civilization, just because of the impact that Kemet has had on the world. But like, is it fair to say, like when Jabari says they copy Christianity as a copy of Kemetic spirituality or Kemetic science, is it fair to say that Europeans copied African or Kemetic or Nile Valley, however you want to express it, culture, and sort of superimposed it over their Christian expression? So they took African culture and superimposed it over and used it as their own expression of Christianity. So in essence, people like Jabari, not necessarily, they may be off on saying Christianity, belief, the belief is a copy, but they not off on saying that they took our social mores, folkways, etc., and superimposed it over into their culture to formulate their expression of this belief, if that makes sense.
Ollie. That's and that would be correct in this. Like I said, the two heavy hitters of ancient African foundation of Christianity is going to be Kemetic and Coptic later, and then your Berber North African. And so you look at like a lot of writings from like Tertullian, for example, or Cyprian, and they kind of give you some expressions, things that they would do, how they would pray, how they would fast. In North Africa, for example, that's the first place where you get the sign of the cross in Berber. When they do it on their forehead, and eventually it went down to their whole thing. Well, you go today and you see people doing this, the first place you're thinking of, oh, that's you being Roman Catholic, or you being Greek, or not understanding like actually it was North Africans that had started this tradition prior to. And if you don't go back and see why they did it, then you just assuming, it's association with, say, Roman Catholicism or Anglicanism. So what happens is you get native cultures in North Africa and in Egypt. They get Christianity. They express it culturally in whatever forms and fashions, vestments, expressions, whatever. And because they are considered the bedrock and foundation, especially from Western society, of Christianity, and any Christian scholar tell you like North African theologian and Christianity is the bedrock of Western Christianity foundation. They take those things naturally and copy and do them. Now, they didn't do them maliciously, so I want to put that out there. It wasn't like the Romans and Greeks did it in a way to be wrong. They really did it in a way to say, man, these people, like, they really got this, and we want to express the way they express. But over time, as with a lot of things become Europeanized and stuff like that. And so when we get it today, we automatically, like, you got brothers Jabari and others who they'll look at that and they look at ancient Kemetic expressions and say, wait, hold on a second. Or you look at that and you look at ancient North African expressions and you're like, hold on a second. Like, oh, they copying it. But like you said, there's a middle ground in that. Don't say Christianity copied it, because I can take you to, there's places, for example, even in Europe, Celtic Christianity, their expressions were nothing like Roman Christianity. They were authentically, European. I can take you to Russian. I can take you to what they call Maritanas in India. Those expressions mirror the culture of that area. And so it would be a misnomer to say that Christianity copied from African religions. What you could say, however, is that certain aspects of European Christianity use the same expressions of African Christians. And over time, they have never been given their due diligence and respect to where they got it from. And so now you superimpose that into a worldview that we all kind of have grown up into, saying Africa is negative. Africans didn't know anything. We were the ones to come up with all this stuff. And then also the other layer on top of that is because of the Reformation in Europe, you have a negative onlook on anything that looks Roman Catholic. And so we inherit that as well too. So it's kind of like we almost got like a double portion of being disconnected from that. Again, those specific areas, African expressions. You got the Roman Church basically disconnecting that history from Africa, and then you also got the Reformation that disconnecting anything that has to do with Roman Catholicism. And so when we inherit that and we look at something that look Roman, like, we don't even look at it and think, oh man, like a Kemetic priest would have wore that. Pre-Christian or a Coptic priest still to this day essentially wears that. And so, and I'm just using that as a foundation of where we at. And then from there, we go down to Nubia and the Coptic, they call it Coptic Church, the Coptic Nubian Church, going down the Hopi, as you said, or going up the Hopi. Let me be more correct in the flow. You have that going on in Nubia, and I'm saying Nubia. If you know anything about Nubia, it's like 3 different nations at that time. So it's not even just one Nubia; it's Nubias. But for the term of our conversations, I'm just saying Nubia. 3 different Nubian Christian kingdoms, and they're in the middle between them and Ethiopia as well too, who has its own history and founding with Christianity and its own unique expressions. That's different from Nubia. That's different from Coptic Egypt. Because contrary to popular belief, period, the Nile Valley civilizations, we got to put that plural because there were different, not just in ancient Kemet and Nubia, but all of these different nations who from the Great Lakes all the way to the mouth of the river, there's multitudes of different cultures and nations and languages. And with Christianity, comes in contact with them, they express those things in certain type of ways. And so that's just, again, talking about that Nile Valley. I like the way Dr. Professor Salim Farji said it, the Sahelic and the Nile Valley Christian. Sahelic being that area basically between sub-Saharan Africa and above the Sahara Africa. And then Nile Valley, of course, we know all about the Nile Valley civilizations, because those being the 2, ancient Christian areas. And so, yeah, you did different expressions, languages, stuff like that, all going down. But again, I want to just tell my brothers and sisters in the faith that when you see something from Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, because again, you can go and look at the Coptic Church and Ethiopian Church today and just see it. But just know that even when you see things in Roman Catholicism, Anglicanism, some Lutherans, Methodists, High Church, stuff like that, a lot of that stuff, not everything, but a lot of that stuff actually has its expressional roots in Africa. And we already know from a theological basis standpoint, Africans, I don't really how you can get, especially Western Christianity, without Africans. Just from a theological bedrock standpoint and what they did, you would have a very different understanding of Western Christianity without them today.
And that's a powerful analysis, because it's almost like they say it's nothing new under the sun. And Black people, African people, have perpetuated culture since, like, even when we look at America, like everything we say, everything we do, it perpetuates the culture of this country.
Mm-hmm.
Like even the term woke, we created that term to describe a particular section of our community, be it conscious or Christianity, etc. It's been co-opted by the wider country to mean something that we never intended it to mean. The term hater or player hater, it's evolved into something that's out. It encompasses anybody that hates on or that type.
Mm-hmm.
We created the term, and so we perpetuate culture, period. And when we look back at the Roman Catholic Church and how it took those African concepts, be it dress, be it symbology, and other aspects, it just shows you we've always done this, and we continue to do it. Like nothing has changed.
Right.
And so I just dig that from that standpoint, because people act like this stuff is new, and it's what we've done from the rip.
And P, here's a couple things I want to add to what you just said. People need to know this. There were 4 African, hear me when I say this, African popes in the first 1,000 years of the Roman Church. Because I don't want to say Roman Catholic Church, because that doesn't come around till post 1054 officially, but there were at least 4 African popes. So that lets you, so we talk about African pope, which just means leader, bishop, leader of that sect. So you don't think they brought their Africanness with them when you talk about people like an Augustine or Tertullian, the Cyprian, who were Africans? You don't think they brought those expressions with them in intersexuality, even within the Anglican tradition? And I want people to look this up. Look up the brother's name is Hadrian of Canterbury, or Adrian of Canterbury. He's a North African, in which the Bishop of Rome got him, who he wanted to actually be the bishop over Canterbury. So you would have had an African in the 600s been a bishop over what came to be the Anglican Church. He set up theological schools all throughout the British Isles for that reason, teaching them the faith, traditions, etc., etc. And so we got Lutherans who are they had to basically, for lack of better word, make sure they get their stuff G-checked correctly with the Ethiopian church. Martin Luther had to do, he did that. He looked at the Ethiopian church as the light of what pure expressions of the faith would look like. And so you can't really escape, even in Western European traditions, an African bedrock, whether it be a theological expression. And so the issue for me with that is not to say they stole it, because I think that's when we go for like, oh, they just, no, stealing was not in that way. It was a sharing of ideas, sharing of expression. What happened is, for lack of a better term, things are whitewashed. You don't know the history behind certain things. So when you don't know it, you assume by default it's European. So you assume that it has nothing to do with you, but that could be nowhere from the point. And it's shocking, when our brothers and sisters get hit with it. They're like, oh man, well, you trying to get this Africanness and you trying to make me into this Comedicism, Christian. Like, no, man, what I'm just trying to tell you, like, there's a history of how things develop. It's not saying that I'm telling you put Jesus away. It has nothing to do with that, but it's trying to show you that everything has a history and everything has a path on how it got here. And for so long, we have been just told how bad Africa is. And the only place that was not, I would say 2 places. The only places that are not Black African or brown African are Egypt, and for lack of a better term, Carthage, North African areas, And so as much clowning as, our brothers give us about the white Jesus, everybody forgets about that, the white pharaohs or the Charleston Hestons. When him playing Moses, they forgot the pharaoh was white too. In that same movie. We forget about all when they draw up Tertullians, Shenoudas, Athanasius, Origins, Augustine, Cyprian. They take away their Africanness away and they look more European. So again, it happens. It has happened, and that's upon us, whether you're in the faith or not, to make sure that we have to correct that for our people and for broader people too, because it's real interesting that from a redneck, white racist redneck who claimed to love the Trinity, in Christianity, you tell them, well, it was an African that came up with that term, So it's interesting. Like all of a sudden we porch monkeys for so long, but yet your same faith that you pray for, or pray to, or pray with an African, a Black man, came up with that whole terminology. And actually, when you look at it, a lot of the bedrock of your whole theology came from an African man. But yet, you have no problem hanging us at the church services. The hypocrisy and the dichotomy is so interesting. And again, that's onus upon all of us. We got to make sure not only educating our people, but we educating the public. But bringing it full back circle, those expressions, when you look at how they use the cultural underpinnings to express certain things theologically, the Coptic Church, they took a magical hymn, whatever you want to call it, that was pre-Christian, right? And that same type of beat, and all they did is in the Christian area, they inserted different terms to express a Christian or triune God understanding. But it's the same, basis beat. You know what I'm saying? It's the same, it's even the same word placement. It's like taking a song today, whatever, throw a song out there, the song as soon as you hear it, automatic. Frank and Beverly, Love and Happiness, right? Dun, 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 dun. So imagine that we all know exactly what happens. You know the words to the song, the steps to as soon as it come on. Now imagine that. That's our cultural norm. We taking everything about that, just changing the wording up to express something differently, but it's still culturally yours. Your people came up with the tone. You still get the same feeling. That's what the Coptic Church did, and that's what a lot of those ancient African churches did. And so that's something that we gotta have an understanding of when, a lot of times we look at things and just try to dismiss it and saying, oh, they're trying to Africanize Kemetic and stuff like that. Because I've heard that before. Oh, y'all trying to Africanize, no, not Africanized Kemeticism, Christianized Kemeticism. Let me I said that wrong. Not African. That's a double entendre. No, Christianized Kemeticism. And I'm like, that's interesting. But even us moving forward, the Nubian church, because there's a ton of material out there for the Coptic church, because I'm capping for them, but they still in existence. The Nubian church, for example, we are now getting more and more information. Shout out to Professor Dr. Salim Farji, because he wrote the last, it's Nubian Christianity, but I forgot, it's like the last pharaoh, something like that. And he really goes into the history of Nubia's relationship with Kemet. And P, I know you all know about how the Nubians had to come in and clean some stuff up in Kemet when things kind of got out of hand, and they had a love-hate relationship.
My namesake, Pianki, in the 25th dynasty, it was his father, Costa, who came up with it. Like, look, we got to go redeem our sister city. And this goes to Byron's earlier point about Nubia not being one country, but a bunch of countries within a country, so to speak. Because a lot of people will point out that one Nasut or Pharaoh would say something derogatory about Cushites or Nubians. I think Vocab said it to try to make it seem as if Kemet was evil or had a negative outlook on all Cushites or Nubians, right? But he forgot to mention, and I think I mentioned it to him, that there were Nubians who fought in the Kemetic army, because all Nubians were not the same or united under one banner, so to speak. And so for those who were feuding with Kemet, for everyone that was feuding with Kemet, there were others who were united with. And so Costa said, as Kemet was under siege by foreign rulers and wars amongst the indigenous rulers, so you had Upper and Lower Kemet, you got foreign rulers squabbling over one section, and indigenous rulers squabbling and instability over the other section. And he said, you know what? We need to go redeem our sister nation, so to speak. And he took it as a sacred task to Amun to do so. He died before he could complete the task, and so Pianki took it upon himself to complete it. Did so, left his brother Shabaka in charge as he went back to Kerma and ruled from there. And of course, we know the story. Shabaka became the ruler after he passed. When he passed it on to Pianki's son, Taharka. Taharka is mentioned in the Bible as the king of Egypt and all the world. So this is our heritage, so that people hate to acknowledge or don't want you to sort of relate to, because they want you to believe that your heritage started on a plantation. No, that's not it. they would even say, why do you skip over West Africa and go over to Northeast Africa? Because I'm African. And the practice of Sankofa does not limit me to one coast. Period.
And to add into that with you is that skipping over, we got to acknowledge that Christianity, whether we like it or not, was involved in the process of where we are today, or people's belief in Christianity. So it should be important to us to know that foundational principle, as you just laid out, all the way to your namesake, to Taharka and his relationship, biblically speaking. As I said earlier, outside the exit narrative, you don't really see this clashing like that between the Israelites and Nubians and Cometics. And the reason why that's important, because that's how we get to the New Testament, to building up through the Old Testament. And so when Nubians get the faith, they're not, we say all that to go full circle. They're not shocked when they hear this narrative. They know they know their own history, first of all, better than we know their history. They know their own history. They know their past. They know the people who they've rocked with, and they understood these things. And so when the Nubians, and I say that loosely, colloquially, but or collectively, I should say, the Nubians, that we are still trying to learn the expressions, because as three of us alluded to before, there's a big bad people that fly under the crescent moon and a star that has destroyed and or blocked a lot of potential excavations, particularly in the Sudan, to find out that history. And for me, this is a disservice, because look, Christian or not, you still would want to know. These are African peoples. Like, I want to know what they were doing during the medieval times. And Dr. Frazier, what I love what he did, like, he really, those digs now are showing how during the medieval era, because we all are exposed to like European medievalism and stuff like that on TV shows, but to show that during that, when they were during their ages, dark ages or whatever the case is, you had Nubia thriving, medieval you thriving. I'm talking about, that's where you get the legends of the brothers with the bows that will block out the sun, and that you see in 300. That stuff that you see in 300. That actually is coming from the Nubian. The Nubians were doing that. They just took they people don't know that, for y'all listeners. When you see 300 and they shooting no arrows and look like it's blocking out the sun, that imagery comes from the story of how good the Nubians were. They were so good that they would shoot out your eye.
That wasn't a Persian concept. That was from Nubia, as the brother just said. And the book that the brother talking about is called The Roots of Nubian Christianity Uncovered, the Triumph of the Last Pharaoh. And so y'all check that out. It's on Amazon. I just ordered it because I love this stuff. So yeah, it's definitely something that we definitely have to examine. And I'm not saying that because I'm not a Christian, but I think it's important that we put some respect on all of our ancestors' names, regardless of what it was they followed spiritually, because they all had reasons for doing what they did. But we got to put respect on their name for what they contributed to our history, period. And so I think that this topic is important, just as important as the 3,000 years of Kemetic history.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond. So all of our history is important. It all fits into that pie of African history, in continental African history and African history within the diaspora. But go ahead, bro.
No, you're good. When I talked to Dr. Faragi, one of the things that he said is important, why Nubian history is important, Nubian Christian history is so important, is because their expressions would have been more, and that's not to say Coptic weren't. Let me go ahead and say that. And not to say Coptic did not continue ancient Kemetic practices, but since during that time they were closer to Greece, Rome, Persia, et cetera, so as you know, the as we often joking, there's a difference between ancient Kemet and Egypt. I just say that. But when you get to Nubia and you get further south, well, the Greeks didn't necessarily go that far down. Neither did the Persians. Not to say they didn't try, and there weren't some attempts, but they didn't go as far south. So when you talk about Ethiopia, the Sudans today, he says it's so important because you really get to see expressions of Nubian traditional spiritual systems, even through the lenses of Christianity. And when you talk about things like magical funerary texts, and I was like, magical funerary texts in the 11th century for a bishop? He said, yeah, because, we hear magic and we think, Harry Potter, blah, 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 blah. He's like, no, it's just saying, it's like prayers, as he transitions to so-and-so, so-and-so. And he broke this down to me. If you go to a headstone today, and we put in, here lies so-and-so born and deaf, and we often you put like a Bible phrase, or we may put something, real nice on the headstone. We don't think of it as magic. What we're doing is just kind of honoring and you're saying like, look, we want to say some good words for this person, what they meant, and this, that, and the third. So when he broke that down to me, I was like, wow, I never understood it from that way because it's never been presented that way to us. And so the Nubian history is so important because you really get a glimpse of just how those people worshipped, how did they understand their religiosity, their spiritual systems. You get another sub-Saharan tradition along with the Ethiopian church that got receipts, and it's important as West Africans because the materials that we have today, and I got one of the books. It's called the Catholic Church in Tropical Africa from 1492 to 17 something. It talks about how in Benin or the Benin Empire. Let me say it, not Benin the country today. In the Benin Empire, which is part of Nigeria, you had the Coptic Nubians interacting there and setting up Christian sites, and they even got a picture of some inscriptions of like dude look just like a West African with a cross, shirt off, got the head rack on, all that kind of stuff. I shared on my Facebook some of the stuff that they got from the excavation. You see mass shells, stuff like that, all up in it within this Christian burial site, which showing that they're taking again their native Africanness that they've always done. They never changed, and they're using this spiritual tradition that some have accepted as true in Christianity and expressing it out through that. So even for that, even just from an intellectual standpoint, any person of African descent should want to know that because we're uncovering a piece of our past that we had no clue about. We don't know much about Nubian history during the Middle Ages because a lot of that stuff, again, was either destroyed by Islamic conquerors or it's buried, and they don't allow excavations. Being point blank serious, unless you go to like South Sudan as a Christian state, but Sudan proper, which is probably where most of the stuff is, you can't do excavations to find out what was going on. And so when you get like gems like that, it's important for all of us to hop on it. And again, as you said, people who freely, no influencing, no sword, no, if I give you this, I'm gonna pay your family off this. No, freely chose to go this route. And not only that, you know anything about the Nubian history, them suckers was bad. I'm talking about when Roman Catholicism tried to go to Nubia, Nubians wasn't having it. When the Arabs tried to come to Nubia for a long time, so much they had to have a truce. They had to have a truce in play until eventually it just became overwhelming, and that's when you saw the fall of the Nubian empires proper into what you see more Islamic states today. But I'm talking about, the areas we know today is Chad, Sudan, South Sudan. Like them brothers and sisters was not to be messed with, cross or no cross.
Right.
Don't cross it. Don't touch. We got our own thing. And so the sad thing that happened with Nubia is, and this is something kind of intertwines within Christianity, when they were battling with Islam, one of the bishops was killed. And so they actually sent a petition out to the Ethiopian church for a bishop. But the Ethiopian church at that time was still under the Coptic church, and the Coptic church was under Arabic rule. And so in essence, the Ethiopian church couldn't send them a bishop. The Coptic church couldn't send them a bishop. And during that time, the bishop was the leader of your Christian community. So they had no way of like being able to continue authentically, sacramentally, within those traditions, their church. And that also, again, helped fall. And there's the dam that they built in the 1960s. I can't think the name of it, but it flooded a lot of Nubia because of that dam. And
I think it was it's the Aswan Dam.
yeah, that's it.
And I'm glad you brought it up, because that flooding brought up some discoveries that had long been denied and rejected by the wider Egyptologist community, because you had a racist notion that Egypt, although in Africa, was not an African nation. You even have some of our brothers and sisters who still say Egypt was established by Mesopotamians, and that Norma was Nimrod, the biblical Nimrod. And so what the flooding of Nubia did, it uncovered the Aswan Valley, and particularly the site known as Kusta. And what we found out due to that excavation was that Nubia had the oldest monarchy in the world.
Yep.
That the iconography that we know to be Kemetic iconography, the Haru Falcon, Aset, Asor, Ma'at, these different characters that we would come to know from on a much wider degree from the Kemetic standpoint, had their origin in Nubia. And so Dr. Bruce Williams of the Oriental Institute, Dr. Emily Teeter, and Dr. Keith Steele all surmised from this dig that Menes, who was on the king's list as the first Nasut or pharaoh of Kemet, is also Norma, who trekked up the Hapi and conquered the two lands, Smatawi as they called it, which was Upper and Lower Kemet. And so Kemet comes out of Nubia. And so it makes sense that you would, as the doctor who you spoke with, who wrote this powerful book, said you got a more pure sort of expression coming out of Nubia than you would coming out of Kemet. That was always the case, if you will, because that was the birthplace of it. Right. Be it Kemetic spirituality, Christianity, or whatever, because this was the original birthplace of that particular expression of civilization. I just wanted to say that, because talking about the flooding of the Aswan Dam and all of that, and what was uncovered with the Kustal site and the Kustal incense burner and all of the different tombs, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Kemet is a continental, indigenous African culture that came out of Nubia, moved up to Hapi, etc. But go ahead, brother.
No qualms there. And so I just think it's important for us, because from a Christian standpoint, especially in America, we are not, being honest, we're not used to identifying African expressions, period. We have African expressions in our things we do, but we don't have the best way of identifying it to say that's African. and especially on the eastern side of Africa. And so when you see, the way they were worshiping and stuff like that, and I was talking to my pastor about this a couple of days ago, and he's even kind of reevaluating some stuff. He's like, "Man, that's crazy because we've been so taught that certain things are European, in expression, and how Protestantism and stuff like that, like that's the way we should do things, and ABCD. And a case can be made that actually, and this is going to again shock some of my brothers and sisters, the expressions of, say, the Roman Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, even the Syrian Church, are actually much more closer to ancient African Christian, all the way up through the mid-centuries expressions, than what we get from the Reformation and post-Reformational period that the quote-unquote Black church inherits later. And so then that puts us on, I'm feeling free, so I can jump off the ledge. It puts us on a question. The original question: is Christianity the white man's religion? Then you have to ask, well, maybe Christianity isn't the white man's religion. Maybe the next question is, are the expressions that we have in America particularly, are they the white man's expressions in black folks? You see, because now, and again, these are conversations that I have with Christians all the time, so it's not, it ain't gonna shake my faith when it comes to what I believe. You see my cross on right now, but you also see this buy black shirt on too, so buy black. Now it puts us, in my opinion, the conscious community been focusing on and asking the wrong question. See, they've been focused on the past 4 or 5 years of hammering down Christianity is a white man's religion, stolen from Kemet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the question. You can actually pick up an easy history book and debunk that question one-on-one easily. Global Christianity. Actually, Wikipedia can do it for you. It's pretty simple laid out. The better question would be, is your expression a African or indigenous expression? Or are you doing a black expression of a European response? And so those questions are tougher, because now if you say you're Baptist, right? Well, Baptist is started by John Knox and John Smith, 2 Europeans who are responding against the Roman Catholic Church. Okay. But the things that they're responding to or reject don't have their beginnings or theological foundation in Rome. They actually theological founded in Africa. So if I'm, say, Black Baptist, and would I reject the Coptic Church? Would I reject the Ethiopian Church? If the Nubian Church was today, would I reject that church? Would I reject the North African Church because it looks Roman? Because then you got it looks Roman. Well, Roman looks African, right? And so again, these are questions. I'm not giving answers or anything like that, but these are questions that we have to wrestle with today, because again, our forebears, they didn't have this information. I'm not faulting our forebears, who were Black, our MLKs, our CH Masons, and people, African Methodists, Richard. I'm not faulting them for that, because they you had to go with what you had to go with. But now, as we are growing and understanding cultural expressions, especially today amongst even the Christian community, in this battle along racial and cultural lines, to where, anything, it would be, for so long, Black expressions would be seen as abhorrent or wrong. Y'all shouting while the preacher shout, y'all saying amen. You ain't supposed to do that. What's this praise break dancing? Not understanding that has its origins in ring shout in West Africa. all these other different, all these other different things. But to the broader Christian world, again, in America, those things were looked at as negative or wrong. We need to get that out there. We need to get that out of them. And some of our people responded by almost being more European Christian than Europeans.
I was just about to ask you, bro, because if you look at any video, old or new, of a Vodun or Ifa, Orisha ceremony around the fire, and you see the woman dancing, I got a woman that's near and dear to my heart. Rest in power, Sister Ruth Miller. Every time she saw me, she said, "My mighty man of valor." And love her. It was like I had a second grandmother. And when she'll do what she called a belly yell, and she'll start moving them feet, you could take her and move that sister out of that Ifa ceremony or that Vodun ceremony and put her in it, and nothing would change.
That changes.
Because again, we perpetuate these cultures. And so I always thought about that as I started to come into particular knowledges about African spiritual concepts versus Christianity. Like, is anybody, am I the only one seeing this? So elaborate on that a little bit, because I think as we've been poisoned against African spiritual concepts and what they truly meant versus what we told they mean, that's got sort of lost in translation or lost in the sauce, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I got to go pay a water bill, so just keep building. And
No, you good.
Back. But yeah, break that down if you will.
So what we have to do is recognize a couple things. We did not have a West African tradition in Christianity that we could see and view that was native prior to the slave trade proper. And again, I'm not saying that Congolese Christianity wasn't, because it definitely was. But as a whole, with Congo is still in Central. We don't really have a way to look back at it, because there was a disruption to where the Congolese Christianity that happened during the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, that was cut off eventually by the Roman Catholic Church and during slavery. And so the Catholic Christianity that you see today is a little different than the native. So we look at our African expressions today in Coptic and the Ethiopian. Well, as we know, purely, definitely African, but on the continent, there's a multitude of different African expressions and African cultures. So a lot of times we don't even connect to those expressions culturally, because there was, Ethiopians don't operate culturally, even without Christianity, don't operate culturally the same way that a Ghanaian will or a Nigerian will. It's just simple. It's not wrong or right. It's just a simple fact. The reason why the Nubian expression was so important, because Nubians were far closer to West Africans than the other two. And their expressions would have been more akin to what we would assume a untouched African Christian expression, West African in particular Christian expression would be. And also the North African church, as well, as the Berbers are traveling down through the Sahel into like the Mali Empire, which had Christians in there from the Sahel in their empire as well. We don't have a chance to actually see those expressions to do a compare and contrast. So what we see today is, Voodoo, Ifa, things of that nature in our previews, and we don't get to see how does a ancient West African Christian tradition look, to see how we compare and contrast. We kind of make it up as we go. In fact, a lot of scholars would say the only West African authentic expression of Christianity would be the Black church. And in this expression, not theology, not practices, but in this expression, because we kept a lot of things, just kept it culturally. And so you're right. You can't. I mean, look, I'm from South Louisiana, man, and bro, the spiritualists, as we call it, you go to a spiritualist, you go to a voodoo session, you go to a Pentecostal church, you can go to a Baptist church at this point, ain't me. You're gonna see similar behaviors cut up all the way around. So we kept a lot of those things, but we just don't have a long-standing tradition. And so then it begs the question to say, man, you know what? How can I get back to culturally? And it's not to say that Europeans' culture is inherently wrong. Everybody has a culture. Everybody has a background. But as me and my pastor, we were talking about it, and he said it like this: you know, in Europe during the Reformation, you had Europeans had the chance to evaluate history and reject certain things of Roman Catholicism. But when you talk about Africans, West Africans in particular, and indigenous people, we never had the opportunity to accept or reject these other ancient traditions. We were just given and says this is right. So the example we gave is like, you know, if you go to Europe, Europe still got Roman Catholicism right now. It still has Eastern Orthodoxy, still has Anglicanism, Lutheranism, etc. Still has it. And then you have those who aren't those in those traditions that are reformed and different expressions and stuff like that. But as African peoples, West Africans in particular, we've never had the opportunity to say we got a ancient tradition from the Nubians or the North Africans or the Coptics or the Ethiopians to take that and assess to see if we're going to keep it, or we're going to reform or do whatever we do, you know, against it or towards it. And so that is a key point to say we have not even had the opportunity to properly assess, to reject or accept those ancient traditions in the way that our European counterparts are, because we were brought up having to be Methodist or Baptist or Pentecostal, but we were never given the faith traditions of the Nubians or the Ethiopians or the Copts or the North Africans, who predate those aforementioned names that I said by 1,500 years. So again, these are all questions that we had to assess, because as we look at our expressions, we've done a hard time condemning Ifa, voodoo, all this stuff as devil worship, right? But not assessing to see from a critical eye to say, are these traditions trying to express a natural cultural expression of a faith, even though they disagree on who Jesus is and what he and how he operates and who God is and stuff like that. The expressions, as you pointed out, the expressions are African. So we still would have to assess to see, like, let's still, these still our brothers and sisters coming from the same people groups, because we find it's interesting. We are okay with sitting in pews in a steeple church, right? Sitting in pews and stuff like that, have a choir behind the preacher, you know, all drums and music to the side or whatever. That's normative for us. But to see a fire and people dancing around the fire, and say people reading their Bible and shouting and dancing and clapping hands, we pause a little bit, not understanding that both of those two subjects are expressions of the culture in which they come from. Because pews in a steeple church, or what we call a steeple church today, and that setup, that is pre-Christian in Europe. They were doing that regardless. And they took that and they European, as they should, in European and Christianized it and made it as such. I have no issue with that. But don't tell me that the hush harbors that my ancestors went through, when they would all gather around in circle and light a fire, and you would have one person with his Bible, sometimes not even his Bible, just exhorting what they got from the Creator, and having these dances and expressions, Don't tell me that that's inherently evil, or telling our indigenous brothers and sisters that they can't have Christian sweat lodges or Christian totem poles expressing their culture, right? And tell them that they got to do it this kind of way. And I'm starting to see that a little bit amongst African Americans in particular, a way to say, well, don't do that stuff, or don't do that stuff, but not seeing the European influences and the stuff that we have. And I'm like, do we need to take some step back? Not saying that we're taking away our faith, take some steps back and assess our culture, access the history of the faith in Africa and the ancient traditions that are in Africa, and look at those as the motherships per se, to see what things can we do today that we that would give us more credence culturally. Because what I found, bro, and being frank, is that ever since Black people have been expressing Christianity on this continent, they have always gotten strife from their European white counterparts in the faith. And not saying all of them, definitely not saying all. And I wonder, because in Africa, they don't have that concept. Not West Africa. I'm talking about in East in Ethiopian. They don't have this concept of a white man's religion or European religion, because they're like, we stand tall long before them. We got our own stuff. And even if you tell them, well, you know, some of the European people don't agree with the way you express it, and okay, okay, and so I ponder that to say, maybe we need to take a play. It gives me thinking. Take a play out of that playbook to say, you know what? Let's look at our stuff to see if we can African Christianize the Black church. And I just coined that phrase here, so you're gonna steal it, at least give your boss some credit. African Christianize the Black church, meaning that let's take the Black church and it's all history and expressions, and let's go further back and evaluate it with the ancient African traditions, so we can have something that's more palatable to us. Because we doing it in everything else. We do it in our clothes. We doing it in our food. We doing it even in our languages. But when it comes to our faith traditions, it's like, well, no, don't go past the Reformation. Now you won't get into that devil worship stuff. And it's just like, you don't have to be Roman Catholic to be an ancient Christian. And I think we have to learn that, like, I don't have to be Roman. I can be, there's ancient African practices, and some things you may or may not agree with, but assess them. Let's look at them through the lens and see what they mean when they say certain things, and what's the innovation and what's not. And so that's why I say, man, I'm a fan of African Christianity because of this. Because it's like it's almost like you're learning African history, and I'm still, in my faith tradition, me personally, but you're learning something, just how Native African people expressed this faith and didn't have to put aside their Africanness to do
it. They didn't have to acquiesce to someone else's culture to believe what it was they decided to believe. That's why I've gotten to a point where I'm gonna do what I do, and I'm gonna believe what I believe, and I'm not gonna believe what I don't believe. But as it pertains to our people, and this is why I've been saying this at the beginning of all my shows, we can disagree without being disrespectfully disagreeable, and our different ideologies shouldn't keep us from uniting, and we can have unity without uniformity. Because if you are for your people, believe whatever you want to believe. We can sort that out amongst ourselves, however we decide to, as long as we respect one another. But at the end of the day, we have to give each other the latitude and the respect to say they have the intelligence and the ability to process whatever it was they needed to still have that belief or to discard that belief and move on and still be brothers and sisters. Like Cap touched my heart the other day. My mother going through what she going through.
Mm-hmm.
And I hit the brother up, let him know we was gonna have to postpone some of our conversation. And he was like, send me back a heartfelt message, and hey, if you need anything, bro, I got you. And I'm like I don't at that moment he could care less about I study Kemetic spirituality, and I could care less about him being an Israelite. We two black men, and he saw he had a concern for me as a brother,
Mm-hmm.
and expressed his support. Period. Our belief was irrelevant, or our belief informed that concern.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, I could care less what another black person believe as long as they love black people and support black people, not in foolishness, but in righteousness.
Right.
And so, that's where I'm at with it, man. And so I think that you bring we kind of touched on something that's interesting though, because as a people in this particular country, we have like a shame or a disdain for being African, to the point that you have people going out of their way to not explore their African identity. They I just mentioned my brother Cap, and that's my brother, that's my captain, but he says he's an Israelite, he's not African. We got other brothers and sisters. I have distant family members. They more akin to my brother Shabaka, but they say that they're Native Americans. They're not Africans. And so we have these identity issues that I think are equal parts shame for some of the messages and images that we get from the continent. And then, we being told that these spiritual concepts are evil. We being told that we shouldn't want to have anything to do with this place. And then, at the same time, again, we Moors, or we are the tribe of Shabazz out of one part of the world, but we went into Africa. So we got all of these different these different stories and origins of why we not African, but we ended up in Africa, right? The slave trade went in reverse. We was taken from here and put over in Africa. All of these different things because we so ashamed of Africa. And again, these African spiritual concepts and cultures are evil. Why is it, from what you've been able to ascertain, what is it about being African and these African concepts, be it spiritual or otherwise, that has a lot of our people wanting to disassociate themselves from the continent? Because again, we got I named some people who just come up with totally different identities, but we also have brothers and sisters who they acknowledge that they are of African descent, but they have no interest whatsoever in anything in Africa beyond just saying, yeah, I know my people got taken from Africa, but that's it. Like, what is it about the continent, about the concept of being African, that has our people so vexed in that way?
It's the easiest way is white supremacy. Because if you can take a people from a land, right, and you have to make them fit, you can't just tell them that they come from nothing, but you have to only show them and prove them that they come from nothing. And then to affirm that they come from nothing, you show them how in the 1800s, how all these, the Berlin Conference, how all these people split up the continent. And now all these Africans are speaking French and Portuguese and Spanish and English and blase. And so you belittle the mind of an African. And then when that comes into it, you strip your identity. You don't know which tribe, nation that you came from. Then there's the other part, like, then on the native side, they've only portrayed Native Americans to look one certain kind of way, which is always odd to me. I'm like, you're talking about North and South America with a multitude of ethnicities, but the only people are only just quote unquote red. Like, that don't even make sense, right? You're gonna have darker Native Americans, you're gonna have cold black, you're gonna have pale skin, people, and we had this discussion. You talking about ranging from geography and all that, but nonetheless, I think it's a shaming of Africa. And you were told that you were the savages. You were told that you were ungodly, that you did child sacrifices and all this stuff like that. And some things may be true because we're talking about a continent, not a country. But what's interesting is that when we pull the layers back of what's going on, what's happening in Europe, that's why I always love like reading European history. I'm like, that's a lot of pot calling the kettle black there. When you talk about savagery, you talk about
a lot of the pot calling the kettle white.
Yeah, essentially, you call them, like, you show to call people savages, man. Y'all witchcraft, like, don't y'all dabble in doing all that kind of stuff and all these paganies and stuff like that. But okay. But I think for us, like I said, you get on different scales. You get people that say they're not African, they're Hebrew, they're more than Native American. And then you get those who say, well, I'm African, but I ain't got nothing to do with them people, right? Like, I'm going to be, and I said it before, I'm going to be more European than the European. I'm gonna show y'all, our brother Malcolm talked about it, but we still see it to this day. It's like, well, dang, brother, sister, you caping harder. Like, if we just get these lazy black people and all these deadbeat daddies in the black community, it's like, oh, okay, so we just gonna ignore like all the stuff, the reason why, again, it's not all black people, but why we were put in this situation to begin with, even post-slavery, but we just gonna ignore that like it ain't nothing, right? You got black people today that's telling, champion to not learn about critical race theory. That's a theory, and B, it only teaches you. They don't even know what critical race theory is, but it only teaches you the aspect of what truly happened in this country to disadvantage minority people, and how it ain't all rose colored. It's the reason why black people celebrate their 4th of July different than their counterparts. We don't be out here with American flags draped around and stuff like that. We might have a little cookout, get the family over, get a couple of beers, maybe cook some fireworks, but that's about it. You ain't gonna see us putting the American flags on our stuff during July 4th. There's a reason behind that. It's a culture. We're still American, but it's a culture behind that, and it's a history. But it's the degradation of African stuff. And so we look at it, we always train to look at it with a side eye, like it's devilish, like it's something wrong with it. But, I always like, but when you peel back, all of this stuff comes from African people. We just finished a series about a couple weeks ago, and I told everybody to watch it, called High on the Hog on Netflix. Amazing series. It talks about the African and Black origins of American cuisine. So I give and I won't spoil it, but I give an example like this. We often hear the term Southern cooking, right? But we know, in truth, it's soul food, which comes from us. And so they talked about, like, for example, George Washington had a slave that was a world-renowned chef. But we don't have too much records of him anymore. Consequently, his wife, Martha Washington, has this infamous cookbook. Now, I ain't this, like our brother Berean say, I ain't the sharpest knife in the drawer. But if you own a slave that's a world-renowned chef, and I know you ain't in the kitchen cooking, Cause them stoves not like our stoves today. You can get burned and be killed in those kitchens back in the day. And now you got this famous cookbook and all kind of stuff like that. It made me cause a pause of thinking to all these people, especially me being from the South, white Southerners. Well, we got this great sugar cookies recipe that's been in my family for centuries, and these tea cake recipes. And you look back like, well, hold on a second. Because the only people that I know that was consistently cooking, consistently in the kitchen, were people like me and you. So even the groundbreakingness of the food that we eat, that we call American dishes, Black people would do it. Catering companies, right? Well, who was catering these large dinners for these plantation owners? Who was setting the place tables? Who was putting the forks in the right places and the spoons and making sure that everybody was served correctly, had the 5-course meals? Who was doing that? So we were talking about catering companies. It's like, man, well, hold on a second. Who had the knowledge? And I just say all this because we took these Africannesses with us to this country. We express it in so many different things that we don't even recognize. Our language today, people joke about our double negatives. I ain't got no. But when logistics experts look at it, it's using the English language, but it's from an African tongue, because that's how we talk. If you go tell your son to go take out the trash, he said, all right, it's done, I got it. And he may not do it until 2 hours later. But the way the Africans talk is that when I say it's done, it's in existence. The future and the past the future and the present become merged to the point to where, all right, Daddy, I got it. Don't worry about it. It's done. It's handled. That means you don't even have to worry about it 2 or 3 hours later, because my son already affirmed and put in existence that it's, again, that's an African linguistic speak. The barbershop talk, when everybody be talking over each other, that's how we don't talk in this raise my hand, my turn, your turn.
Right.
That's how we communicate. And I'm just saying that because we got to recognize the Africanness in our everyday things that we do.
There you go. It's one phrase. I apologize for cutting you off because you just said something powerful. It's one phrase that I probably told my wife 1,000,000 times, and I soon to be 24 years together. I told you I was gonna do it. Because if I said yes, it's yes. Man, anyway, go ahead, bro. I just had to throw that in there because I know she listens.
It's something funny, like when somebody say, man, I don't have money. Okay. I ain't got no money. Dang. I ain't never got no money. Those 3 phrases mean something totally different, but in English language, those are like if you take a grade level English class, you fail because that's not how you're supposed to put a sentence together. Right. But I just said something that added a couple words, and you knew exactly from saying I ain't got money to I ain't got no money to I ain't never got no money. Those 3 things mean something totally different, right? And I'm just using that as a small example to show the Africanness and even the way we speak and communicate. This real fear of African, and even in shout out to our indigenous brothers and sisters too, because I don't want to leave them out the frame, man, because man, I say that because I just finished watching this HBO series called Kill All the Brutes. Man, yeah, that's all I gotta say. But we have to do better and understanding and extrapolating our culture and not seeing our culture as equal, right? Like we don't have to take a step back to anyone to apologize. And I love that, unapologetically African, unapologetically Black, whatever you want to call it, because you don't have to apologize for your culture, which you come up in and where you come from. And it comes down even to our spiritual traditions to where we don't even want to look at non-Christian African traditions in West Africa, or even Christian traditions in Africa that we don't agree with. Because as I said with my pastor, as he said to me, and he said this straight up, he said, do I disagree with them? Because they're like, he was talking about like the Ethiopian church, full disclosure. He's like, do I disagree with them because they're wrong, or because I have been inherently taught that they're wrong from someone else's perspective in history? And the reason he was saying is like, am I talking for myself who has looking at 2,000 years of Christian history, or am I looking at it from the lenses of the tradition of American Christianity, looking at them and saying their expressions and the way they believe certain stuff in ABCD are wrong? And it's a real, and it's again, that's on the spiritual tip, but it's everything else. And so we get that the results is we get the aspects of nobody wants to be African, everybody want to be black, nobody want to be African. So, nobody want to, I'm a Moor, I'm an Israelite, I'm a this, and I'm a that. And I always tell people like, Moors were in Africa. So that still don't disqualify you from being African. Israelites are in Africa right now, still to this day. That don't disqualify you from being African. And even the term African, as we know it, that's a modern term. The people on the continent didn't call themselves that, and they didn't have no boundaries. So this idea of getting away from our culture and seeing it lesser than, we have to do a better job collectively teaching our next generation. Black is beautiful, great, yes, but also showing like, Africa is beautiful as well too. Intentionally showing them good images, and then also, and I'm planning to do this in a few weeks, telling the truth about the dominant cultures past too. Telling them about their paganisms that they put into their TV shows and stuff. I just finished Loki series that just ended, right?
Man, listen.
Like you put they have no problem putting their pre-Christian pagan stuff into normalized society. Harry Potter got like 7 books and like 8-9 movies dealing with wizards and stuff like that. But we were told that voodoo priests were the devil.
Come on.
Right?
That's why when my son got ready to write his stories, and he wanted a character that was a demigod or a god type character, i.e. Thor from Marvel. And he was going to use Hercules. And I was like, son, that's been done 1,000 times. Because he big on not copying or, infringing on what somebody else did. So I said, he was like, so what you think? I was like, do something African. And so he was like, you want me to do Haru? I said, no, you ain't got to do Haru. And so I told him about Shango and and he was like, oh man. So, he got a story coming up where Shango is the focus and the Orishas are the supporting characters. And it's similar in the storytelling mode that Marvel did Thor or that DC did Wonder Woman. But it's different. And you know what I mean? And
yeah.
I think it's important for him to come from that aspect than to follow that same old trope. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with it.
Right. And that's what we have to be able to assess, because we've been told these same things in our cultures were so wrong and so evil. But yet, when we put a lens back, like you have normalized European cultures, whether pagan or non-pagan, Christian or non-Christian, you normalize it to where we don't even look twice at it. And it's like, but everything from our stuff is wrong. Like what do you? And so now you gotta go back and go, hold on a second. Let me take some steps back and let's look at some stuff to see, what's right, what's wrong, and then give us and we need to respect ourselves and give us respect to say, I can have cognizant dissonance. If you can be a white man from Arkansas and go see the newest Black Widow movie that just dropped, right? And Marvel or Wonder Woman when that dropped. Take your kids, no problem, right? And you don't have no issues on Sunday morning going to church. Then with all due respect, when we do Black Panther, I don't need y'all assessing. And I seen Black people assessing, we gotta remember, we can't let these Africanisms mess with our spiritual. So I'm like, y'all did this for Black Panther, right? But y'all didn't have no problem when it was Superman with an alien being coming from Krypton saving the world, right? But an African man with technology that's coming, like, well, you know, you can't let all them African, like, we got to stop that.
Bro, come on, man.
We got to stop that because I can look at Black Panther, I can look at Ashanti, the spider, and look at those stories and not have my faith feel like it's infringed on because I understand that storytelling and that's going on, and I understand my faith here. They do it all the time, but it comes to us, we all of a sudden gotta like, we can't allow that in the community. And I'm like,
think about it, bro. We are so spooked by our own culture. Because you just hit something so powerful, man, because Greek culture, because that's the standard for which they perpetuate their society, Western civilization, etc., right? That is, Greek heroes are the standard by which all of their stories are told. Hercules, Perseus, Achilles, all of these different things, right? They have no shame. Beowulf,
have to read that in high school.
Thor, all of these things, they have no shame. They glorify in these things.
Homer and the Iliad.
These are blockbuster movies, and they've been adapted in comic books, in novels, American Gods, the
TV shows. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it continues because they have no shame of it. They architecture, everything, they embrace it. Like I said, they embrace Greek architecture, culture, storytelling, etc. They honor the Iliad and the Odyssey. But you let us bring up the Per M Harut. What are you talking about? You let us bring up the pyramid text, or like you said, Anansi, the
yeah, I don't know why I said something.
You know, or Zulu mythology, or the story of Ogun and Yamaya in the Orisha culture. Let us start talking about those things and see the faces that you will get, because we've been so poisoned against our own culture. Because like the man said, the definition of power is the ability. Now this is not the dictionary definition. So I want to make sure we clear on that for my brothers who gonna say that's not the.
They gonna Google you. They gonna Google you.
That's not the definition. So for my brothers who gonna say that's not the definition, I got you. But I want to make sure that I'm saying that from the beginning. But one example, let's say it like that. One example of great power is one society or one civilization's ability to conquer and subjugate another society or civilization and superimpose their culture, their social mores, folkways, and everything they are onto that civilization and culture and society, while erasing their society and poisoning them against their own society. That's got to be one of the greatest examples of power that you have ever seen from a physical standpoint, a psychological standpoint, and a spiritual standpoint. Like Native Americans, for everything that they've been through, they still, Christian or otherwise, they still embrace their culture and their history. Mexicans still embrace their culture. Like, they can be Christians. They still love the Aztecs. You see what I'm saying? Like, we are the only. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me tell you how power works. What is the difference between a Native American, say a Choctaw, and a Mexican?
Break it down.
Nothing. Because Mexico is a country. It's a political estate. But those people groups have always been there, whether they're on the Mexico, Spanish rule, whatever. We create these borderlines to say who are you and who are not. So when we do these assessments and we say all these illegal illegal aliens. We're like, but these are their native land. Just because you drew a land between New Mexico and Mexico and Arizona and Texas and Mexico, these are still their native thousands of years communities.
Right.
And so when you do a U.S. census, when those people, they are forced to check Mexican American. They don't check Native American. So in essence, what you just done for indigenous people, you have split them up to either be Native or Hispanic, Latino, Mexican. So that population is now split. So now you can say, well, it's not that many of them that y'all think. No, they're still here.
Right.
They do the same thing with us when it comes to African American, but let you speak Portuguese or Spanish, you Latino. So you gotta pick that. You can't speak, but it's just like, wait, so you telling me my designation is based off of what European conqueror I had?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
That's power.
Power, bro.
That is a power. And then now they take your native histories, culture, and have demonized it to the point to where, like, I'm in Louisiana, so we do Mardi Gras. And it's always celebration. They do celebrations of Greco-Romans and Greek gods and stuff like that. But we do Africans when we do ours. So when we do Africans, people look at like, why y'all doing this and why you doing that? I'm like, but you have no problem with Ophiuchus, Zeus, all this other stuff. But when we did our Mardi Gras, we did Crew of Oshun, or Oshun, however you pronounce it. They look at it as crazy. Now, Oshun is a water goddess in West Africa, and I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We got the Mississippi River. So that makes the most sense because the river has literally shaped our culture here. But now you're looking at us, white and black, looking at us side of what's going on, and you start to see the dichotomy. It's like, well, hold on a second now. You have normalized European culture, and I don't have an issue in inherency with European culture because they should celebrate their own heritage and culture. But I'm saying I should be able to celebrate mine freely and have held to the same standards as anyone else's. So if in high school I got to read Greek gods and heroes, you know what? I want to read about the Orishas too. If I got to read the Odysseus and the Iliad, I want to read about Ptahotep. Let me learn about the first architects in the known world. Why can't we learn about the oldest written text in the world? I ain't saying you got to agree with their spiritual traditions, but at the same time, I'm not sitting here worshiping Zeus and Hercules neither. And I don't know many white people that are, but we still know every single thing about them. Exactly. We still get a movie every 3 years about them. Tell me when the next Ptahotep movie.
Exactly.
When the next movie about the Haru, or when they give you a movie, they give you the dude from Game of Thrones. Playing. And then throw you a bone and give you our brother Chadwick, may he rest in power. Throw him a bone. Oh, well, we'll give y'all one black one.
Right. Jamie Lannister playing Haru and the dude from 300 playing Sutek. Like, come on, man. Come on. Like,
come on, bro.
Yeah.
Come on. You know what? And I'm just like, y'all would never let Morgan Freeman have played Zeus. And see how y'all would act.
But The Rock played Hercules, and it was like, wait a minute. But he don't say he black, so it's okay. Like did that? Like people actually had to rationalize. Well, he say he's Samoan, even though we know when we look at Samoans and we hear Samoan, like we know.
To even say he black. His daddy is all you got. If you know wrestling, Rocky Johnson is a black man. Yeah. The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, had never denied his blackness, but he also affirmed his Samoan, which I ain't got a problem with. I'm your mother and your father. But how they always say, well, he not black, he's Samoan.
Exactly. Come on, man.
Oh, now you putting the qualifiers out. But then when my people in Louisiana and Mississippi got their land taken because they had or white people getting their land taken because they had a tenth of black, 100th of a black in them. They black, but now The Rock, he's Samoan.
Exactly.
And it's cool for him to play Hercules because he kind of he kind of almost, you know what I'm saying? So these dichotomies, I just say all that to say, because I got to end up closing out as well. I didn't realize we was rocking this long.
Yeah,
But,
I just looked at that myself. you called it though before we went on.
You're right. But you know, it's like, bro, your Africanness is like, bro, you don't have to put that into to my all brothers and sisters. You don't have to put that into your pocket. You don't have to apologize for it. You can walk in your truth, in your whatever spiritual tradition that you have. I implore you, a Black Christian, to really look into African Christian, anybody personally, because I think there's a lot of African history, period, that we don't acknowledge during that time frame. Either you have a bias against Christianity, period, and you don't want nothing to do with it, and you just discounting the fact that these were Africans. And then if you're a Black Christian and you just unaware of a Christianity that's 2,000 years old expressed on the continent, I think all those things are true, and that we need to have a chance to investigate, to look at, to read more, and assess. Because I'm being unapologetic, even as a Christian, I feel like this. If a lot of our brothers and sisters who are no longer in the faith or reject the faith were brought up from birth to, even if they weren't in those traditions, to know about them and to have that option and to really, really know about it, I don't think we would have some of those issues that we have today, because a lot of people is just like, I can't, and this is true, I can't separate Christianity and Europeanism because I don't know any Africanisms of Christianity. And even in the Africanism of Christianity, I know it's got European involvement. So I'm like, I don't want to do it. I think personally, again, not everybody, if a lot of people had that growing up, even me, I'm going 33 in a few weeks, and I still would be like, man, I wish I knew about the Coptic church and the Ethiopian church and the Nubian churches so I could have a better grounding and be even more secure and not have to apologize for my Africanness and my Christianity, and just be like, I ain't got to apologize for nothing because my people been rocking this for 2,000 years. My lineage and the history goes back to, as you just laid out easily, almost an hour ago at this point, about how the father of Pianki and Pianki himself and his kids going all the way to Taharka, and how does that coincide with the Old Testament? And then you got that coincide with the New Testament, and then Christ himself going into Egypt, and the prophecy in the Old Testament saying, out of Egypt I'm gonna call my son, right? And you got Paul being mistaken as an Egyptian or Kemetic to our brothers and sisters in the New Testament. So, and you got an African man picking up the cross for Jesus, and when he drops it to bring it all the way to the thing, you got Apostle Paul being coached and brought up by Africans like Apollos or whatever, Apollos teaching Paul about the faith. Like, we had this in the New Testament, but because we are disconnected from it, we don't see ourselves in it. And so even those who end up rejecting the faith, they don't have a connection back to Africa, because that's really what it is. I'm gonna call it what it is. You don't have no connection back to Africa. Whether you want to be Hebrew Israelite, Moorish, you don't feel like you have a spiritual connection back to Africa, so therefore you got to reject it. And I'm like, let's build that spiritual connection back. Either if it's through Kemet, if it's through West Africa, if it's through North, South, whatever, build that back. At least build your historical knowledge so you out here operating in a truth and not having to apologize for your faith or what you believe in because of its association with the wrongness of a sect of people that have only been in the faith for about 400 or 500 years at best, and most of them got it wrong anyway.
Well, you heard what my brother said, and he said what he said, and y'all know what it is with me. Like I said, if it's African history, I'm here for the good, the bad, and the Christianity of it all. So let's not get it twisted. Christianity is a part of African history. And African people, like it or not, shaped and molded this spiritual tradition. And
exactly.
So now we can't help how it was co-opted and weaponized against indigenous people all around the world. But we know for a fact that African people shaped and molded it into what it is. And again, it was co-opted and weaponized. But we, as we've done since our inception, we move the needle for spiritual culture and for societal culture on this planet, period. Like Pac said, if they could be black, then they would switch. But lucky enough, we ain't got to worry about that because we was born black. So I just want to say I appreciate you coming on, brother. This was a great show. If nobody else enjoyed it, I did because it was educational, and I learned a lot. And we definitely gonna have you back on for that second conversation between you and I as far as the black church and why I have it over here and I got the rest of Christianity over here. And we'll get into that and break that down. So y'all look forward to that conversation. Let the people know what you got going on as far as your work in the community, social media, all of that.
Man, I got my open market coming up on the 31st. Again, it's in Baton Rouge. It's called Scotland Saturdays. It's a monthly entrepreneur market for small businesses as well for the culture. So we got a lot of artists coming out. Like this month, we're honoring some youth poetry team is going to be spitting, and we got a young comedian. He gonna do a set for the people, and it's back to school time, so we want to honor the kids and stuff like that. So man, yeah, we just doing stuff in the community. Like I say, I don't like to brag on a lot of stuff. I just do my stuff and just let the chips fall where they may.
Well, he don't like to brag, but we're gonna brag on the brother. The brother doing big time work in this community. Y'all support him any way you can, brother. If you got a Cash App or a PayPal where people can donate, throw it out there. And I'm dead serious. Like this brother, support our brother any way you can. That said, this has been another episode of Paradigm Shift TV 314. Y'all know me, it's your brother Pianki Patai Moon 2 Nephra Moon Ra. That's my boy B Wash. And we'll be black at it again. Till next time, that's peace. We out.